Hello, goblins and ghouls. So, I'm attempting to occasionally do an Ask Me Anything or AMA for my podcast. Each question might receive its own individual podcast episode, unless the question sucks, in which case I'll answer it as sort of a throwaway segment, and it'll probably appear in, an episode where I talk about other questions people have asked. So basically, make your questions good. And here is one of the results from this effort. And this is J.M. Brannick. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I mean, just know that if you do submit a question, I might botch your name. But anyway, J.M. Brannick asks, what do you think makes a good camp movie, and why is camp so lasting in our hearts? So to be specific, camp or campy style means, quote, deliberately exaggerated and theatrical in style, typically for humorous effect. So for me, what makes a campy movie memorable is that it makes some sort of personal connection, or it has that feel like this movie could have been made just for me, that sort of emotion. Then again, I think it's debatable exactly what campy means. See, I prefer the term campy over camp, because to me, campy sounds different than camp. Like, camp makes me think of, going outdoors or whatever, having marshmallows and hot dogs. So, there's already sort of a difference of opinion right there because I prefer calling it campy, others prefer the other term. So it's one of those things that is hard to truly define, like cheesy or the music genre of grunge. And that could partly be because we really just make these terms up. They're a product of categorization. And as a sort of cultural obsession, I think people really like to sort of split hairs between this genre and that, or this style and that. It's one of the things that nerds end up doing. So, for example, some people say Stone Temple Pilots music isn't grunge because they were too ballad oriented, or maybe because they weren't from Seattle. But if you ask me, STP actually does have some heavier, kind of grungy sounding songs, whereas Pearl Jam, in my opinion, actually has more ballads and are in some ways more boring than Stone Temple Pilots. But other people have the opposite opinion. They think Stone Temple Pilots were too ballady, and that they're more boring in pop. And how can you define a genre solely based on where it originated, though? Like, you could say, grunge is music that comes from Seattle. But really, even the Chicago blues style isn't just relegated to the actual city of Chicago. There's an actual style that can be sort of approximated even by people who do not live there. It's an actual style with meaning apart from actually occurring in Chicago. And I think you can find camp elements in really a lot of different things, movies and TV shows that probably are not typically even considered campy, because it's really sort of a relative term. For me, it's similar to how a little bit of campiness goes a long way. Like, that's part of what makes them memorable. So I think The Breakfast Club was more like a diamond than just a piece of trash. I'm tempted to say that movie is sort of a masterpiece of campy movies. And if you think about it, it's not a good, safe camp movie. It's got a lot of heavy themes in it. It's a heavy, edge-of-your-seat movie with lots of sexual themes and violence and plenty of food for thought. You have a limited number of characters with diverse representations, yet they all have common themes. There's a lot to digest in The Breakfast Club, and it is a movie with some campy elements, but it also has, a fair amount of serious topics that I think help make it more memorable. So it's, to me, that's part of what makes a campy movie special and memorable, is that it's not only camp. Like there's something maybe a little bit deeper to it. You know what I mean? Like obviously campy comedies can be good, and sure we might remember them, but I think the ones that make like the bigger impact are going to be movies that have more unique elements to offer than just being jokey or whatever. I think it's very bold of a movie. I mean, as far as the Breakfast Club goes, and I think that's why it continues to be popular. It's also popular because it shows how high school can provide all sorts of unique, stupid little hellish moments. Yet at the same time, its campy elements prevent it from becoming truly dramatic. You know what I mean? It's not over the top drama. It probably won't even make you cry, but it might make you get kind of emotional a little bit. And, just like it probably won't even be the funniest movie either. But it is just funny enough to like make you laugh, perhaps, unless you just hate it altogether. I know there are some people who do, but my point is that there's a lot of different things going on. And if it had been like the little orphanage story, where you got a bunch of sad, depressing orphans dying of disease, and it probably wouldn't have worked and as such a memorable movie. Because really, if you look at a lot of these Oscar fodder type movies, yes, some people might remember them, but they're not as broadly remembered. I think it would have been deficient in the camp department if it had been like way more dramatic. And the Breakfast Club as we know it is relatively nutrient rich, in a manner of speaking. We remember it because it's fun and it's bold. So now you're probably going to be thinking, oh, Wade, you're heaping too much praise on the Breakfast Club. It must be your favorite movie. But oddly enough, it's not. I can have many movies that are like among my favorites. Yet this one is actually be pretty far down the list of my favorite movies. Honestly. Yet I'm still able to heap this kind of praise onto it. It's kind of weird, right? But, if it was a typical coming of age film, it would have been just that. And I would say that even the violence in the Breakfast Club is corny, or the implied violence. But it's violence nonetheless. So that kind of gives it a little bit of a serious edge, as I suggested. It's got a lot of depth. Now I can't say that no one would have been clamoring to see The Breakfast Club had it been more of a straightforward drama, but I think it would have been more forgotten over the years. It would have just been a movie rather than some popular spectacle to feel nostalgia for later on. Like, take a painfully serious movie like Schindler's List. Like, do people really feel nostalgia for that? Not really. It's considered an important movie, and it is a good movie. But goddamn, you're probably not going to watch it like that many times in your entire life. That's more like a one and done sort of thing, right? It's like the difference between a major porn star or a figure model in an art class. Both are likely going to be nude on the job, but which one are you going to remember more? The one that creates a spectacle and does things that are over the top? Or, the more boring one? I mean, that's kind of a crass comparison, but in a way it kind of fits with what we're talking about. Because crassness kind of goes hand in hand with these campy type of movies. So on that note, interestingly enough, I have been in art classes where nude models were present, and oddly enough, it becomes mundane after a little while. Even if you're like a horn dog, you might actually realize, oh wait, I've just studied a nude body for an hour and I didn't even think about it that much. Because, it just becomes, it's more mundane and boring than some people would think. And that to me is like the difference between a regular movie and something campy. An audience has a million reasons not to see a movie, but if it seems like a thrill ride, they might just have to check it out. If it's a horror movie, maybe they'll say I was sickened, but if it's outrageous enough, they'll probably remember it from time to time and say, "Oh yeah, I saw that." I think it's these moments that make a camp movie classic too. For example, I don't really think Elvira, Mistress of the Dark is particularly great, personally, but that's part of why I can watch it, oddly enough. It's not trying to knock anybody's socks off. It's really sort of like junk food for the soul, I guess. It won't necessarily nourish you all day, but whatever, you can still partake every so often and have a little laugh. And that's really one of the great things about campy movies. Also, because I was talking about some of the more intense and violent stuff in film, I've thought about whether it's healthy for general audiences, and I try to take the question a little bit seriously. So, that there are people who have noted that depictions of violence are sometimes depicted as pornography in its own right. But somebody named Anne Barsh of the University of Augsburg is quoted in an article by Science Daily as saying that perhaps depictions of violence that are perceived as meaningful, moving, and thought-provoking can foster empathy with victims, admiration for acts of courage and moral beauty in the face of violence, or self-reflection with regard to violent impulses. So yeah, I think that's another cool thing to think about, when it comes to like campy horror movies, for example. I mean, they might offend people for kind of making light of violence, but I think that if you have a certain mindset and you're capable of empathy and stuff like that, sure, you might laugh at people getting killed in horror movies, but I think it might help you better tolerate violence in the world, and not in a bad way, but in the sense where you can cope with it. Like I think most people who watch horror movies are still going to be like outraged at real life violence a lot of the time, but I think they're a little bit more prepared to deal with the stress of life, I think, and maybe to process it intellectually and from an ethical standpoint and all that kind of stuff. I also think campy movies can allow for self-reflection. I mean, on that note, and the sense of sometimes positive nostalgia. I might sometimes criticize nostalgia myself, but I also need to wonder who the hell would I be to say all nostalgia is bad, It's literally one of the reasons we go on living, remembering the good times in life. We want to relive and experience some of the pleasant emotions from the past, and who am I to say that's always bad? I've always been a huge fan of campy movies, but I'm glad they're not the only ones I can see. So basically, that's all I have to say about the topic of campy movies for now. I think I've really covered the topic, and again, if you have any sort of question you want me to answer on this podcast, you can go ahead and look my name up on social media. I'm on Twitter, and I'd rather have it be on Twitter, honestly. But I guess you could maybe stalk me on Facebook as well. Just again, ask a good question. Try to make it fair. Be intelligent with it. Obviously, you don't want to be doing some death threat kind of shit. So yeah, if your question is good, I will most certainly address it in a future episode. And if it's bad, well, I might still address it, but it won't be having a full episode worth of attention. So anyway, have a good day.